What's going on, everybody? Here to give you another repair tutorial for the Xbox 360 console, fat version. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the simplest ways to try to get rid of a red ring. It's not a surefire way. You could have other things causing red rings besides what we're fixing, and it could be a bad enough red ring that this won't really do anything. But for some of you, mainly this is going to be just to try to get some more life out of your console without having to buy a whole new console or go to a technician and pay 50 or 60 bucks to fix it up for you. What we're going to be doing is messing with the heat sinks and the CPU and the GPU chip. To start off, before we get started, I'll give you an idea of what all we need. First, I have some heatsink compound. Some people call it thermal compound, but that's going to be a definite need. For this console, it's never been messed with before. The heat sinks have never been taken off, so I'll be using a straight edge razor blade to get the old heatsink compound off. That makes it a lot easier and a lot more simple to get it off than just trying to scrape it off, and plus you could do damage if you just try to scrape it off with a screwdriver. Next, we'll need a little pair of pliers to get some of the stuff off and stuff like that. Then you'll need a T8 Torx head screwdriver, and yeah, that's what you'll need. Just so you know, I've already got it taken apart to this level. If you're not sure how to get your console open and get it taken apart to this level, make sure to check out my other tutorials. As you can see, there's a link up now. That link will take you to a tutorial on how to get your Xbox 360 console opened up and get it to the point that we're at right now. Alright, let's get started here. First, what we're going to do is we're going to flip it. These 8 little screws right here are what holds the X-clamps on, so we're going to take all those out. I will also say that there are little kits you can buy that consist of some washers and some bolts that replace the X-clamps. I've had more problems with those than good that they've done, so typically I just take this apart and put the X-clamps back on. It just makes it a lot easier, and plus you have a lot less chance of the bolts putting too much pressure on everything and causing even more problems than you had to begin with. Alright, let's get the rest of these out. Make sure once you've got all these out, you cannot lose one of these. If you do, you're taking a big risk running it with only one missing. So make sure you put this in something that has 4 sides, something that if they try to roll away, they won't roll away. Otherwise, you'll be really taking a big chance on messing up your console. Alright, now that that's out, all we're going to have to do is we have to kind of lift on this, like so, and then remove the motherboard out of the metal casing. And we're going to set that aside. Okay, next what we're going to do is we're going to flip it. And as you can see, the dreaded X-clamps. These things are definitely a pain to get off, and so I would suggest having some sort of small flathead screwdriver. The smaller the head on it, the better. If you have something that's kind of big and meant for bigger applications, then you run a risk of messing your console up. The main thing you want to avoid here is while you're trying to pry these up, don't put too much pressure, because if the screwdriver slips out and slides across this motherboard, you'll end up breaking several lines right here, and then, you know, pretty much your console will be unusable at all. So just be really careful when you're taking this out. So the first thing we're going to do is first you stick the screwdriver head right in here, and what you do is you kind of push down to get it in there, and then start to pry out and pull up a little bit at the same time. once you get it out of there good, see this one's a little too, there we go. As you can see, that one popped up, and this out of there. You only really need to get 2, so if you get 2, then the other 2 are going to be able to come off pretty easily, most of the time. So just easy does it. And remember, see, I almost accidentally scraped across the board there. And if I would have done that, I would have broke all these traces right here, and we would have been in bad shape. There we go. Just remember, it's more about the upward motion than the outward motion. That will definitely keep you from getting it across. Now this should wiggle off, although I might still have to pry, but it didn't. It came out. Set that aside. We'll go ahead and take this heat sink off, like so. Go ahead and get it out of the way and make this a little bit flatter. Alright, we'll move on to the next one. Do the same thing, just be careful when you're prying it up. And just always remember it's about the upward motion more so than the outward motion. Now some of you may be having a lot harder time than I am, but I've done this quite a few times, and sometimes they're wedged in there just right. If you get to one and you just can't get it, just move on to one of the other ones. Maybe it'll be spaced a little bit better to make it a little bit easier on you. About got that one out. Oh. Alright, there's one. Let's get this next one off if we can. Always try to get 2 next to each other. That way you only have to pry up 2. Because if you do crossways, these will be pretty tight on there. Coming up slightly. These are also pretty resilient, so you don't have to worry about bending them. Plus, once you get them all put back on and screwed back in, they're going to pretty much form back to their original shape if you did bend them a little bit. Alright, and there's that one. Now we got that off. Okay. Now let's get this GPU heatsink off. Alright. Now, as you can see, the heatsink stuff is pretty stiff. It's not completely hard as a rock or anything, but it is definitely a lot harder than the compound we'll be putting back on there. So don't be worried about that. Now, the main thing we're going to be doing and being careful about is getting it off of here. There's always a crap load of it spread all out. You don't really have to worry about getting all that off. The main thing is getting off the actual metal heads of the computer chips here. Because that's where it actually makes the contact with the heat sinks. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our razor. Never dig into it like this. Always use it like a razor blade, nice and straight. You're kind of just sliding it across and scraping it off like so. Now you're always going to have a little mark. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a couple of Q-tips and some glass cleaner and just kind of try to clean that up a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the better and the cleaner you get it, the better off you're going to be. So let's just do one more little way, maybe across here too. You can see that's about all I'm going to get off with the razor. Alright, so let's get our glass cleaner and Q-tip, get a little bit on there. Nail polish remover will also work, but you do need to let it dry up and make sure it's good and dry before you start applying the new heatsink compound, because mixing that together could cause you some problems. I've never actually had it cause me problems, but just because of the way nail polish remover works, I'm pretty sure it could do something there and cause a bad connection later. But if you're just having a real hard time getting it off, nail polish remover is definitely going to do a better job than just glass cleaner. See, all I'm trying to do here is just get the main part of it off to make sure there's no big chunks or anything. As you can see, it's cleaning off just enough here to be satisfied with. Just going to make sure I get as much off as I can, and that'll probably be pretty good. So we're going to set that aside, and then we're going to do the same thing here with our CPU chip. Going to take the razor blade and kind of do a scraping motion. Now, if you have a console that doesn't have that same type of really thick, pasty heatsink compound, that means that somebody's probably opened it before and done this before. But if that's so you really don't need the razor blade, you can probably just wipe most of it off. Because if you don't need the razor blade, it's always good to try to just go ahead and avoid it. Because it does just run the extra risk of maybe you making a mistake and messing it up. Alright, so we got our Q-tip here. We're going to do this. The CPU is always a lot easier. I think it's just because the GPU is usually a lot of where the red ring problems come from, so it gets caked on there a lot worse and burnt on there, kind of. As you can see, this is all pretty much gone off of here. Okay, so that'd be pretty good there. Kind of wipe some of my excess off of here, so it'll be sure to be dry. Now for the little bit more tedious part. Well, not necessarily tedious, but more difficult. When you do this, always make sure that you are perfectly flat on that computer chip. If you lean it in one direction, like this or this, you can end up scraping one of these little itty-bitty, some of these are capacitors, some of these are types of resistors and stuff. So if you actually scrape and pull that off, I mean, you're pretty much screwed from there, and you might as well just go look into buying you a new Xbox. So just nice clean motions, scraping it off. Nothing too crazy. Mainly you're just getting the bulk of it off, and then cleaning it with your glass cleaner. You don't have to use much pressure, but you do have to use just a little. But you don't have to like force yourself down there, because I have seen where people have actually chipped off corners of it, and of course at that point it's all but useless as well. So as you can probably see, it's looking a little bit cleaner. Still got a little fuzziness on there, but that's okay. We'll clean most of that off. Now we'll do this second part of this GPU, the smaller piece. Just kind of scrape it off. Little by little, as carefully as possible. Little short strokes are good too, as long as you're just making sure you're keeping it nice and flat on there. Okay, now we'll move on to this CPU chip. This one's usually the easier one again, just because, like I said, that GPU is getting forced with a lot more heat on it and a lot less protection from that smaller heatsink. But not always. Alright. Now, just to let you know, if you clean it off perfectly, it'll have a very, very shiny, very clean, most of the time you'd be able to see your own reflection in it, if you do it right. But if you can't get it perfect, that's okay. It's not necessarily going to mean that it's not going to work. Just the cleaner you can get it, the better. Okay. Now let's see if I can get the majority of this off with Q-tips. Now, if this is too difficult, this is also something you can use nail polish remover on, and this is actually, most of the time, this is where I have to go to the nail polish, because this last little bit that's on these chips is almost always the most difficult to get off of there. But like I said, the more you can stand to use your patience to get off, the better. And this actually ain't doing too bad. Hopefully the camera is good enough where you can see it's getting real nice and shiny, which means you're pretty much taking all of the compound off, and it's going to get a perfect connection once you put everything back together. And don't forget this little one too. This little guy here is just as important. Alright, let me switch sides here. Put a little more cleaner on it. Okay, and that one's looking pretty decent too. Still a little bit on there, but not too bad at all. So we'll move over here to this one now and do the same thing. I think my little Q-tip's getting a little bit too mucked up, so I may have to get a new one, which I think I will. I may actually scrape this one again. This didn't quite get as much as I thought of. So I'm going to take a little bit more off here. Just always being careful that you're not getting those secondary parts on the computer chip. I have done it before, and trust me, it really does ruin it if you tear any of that up. And you see how small these little parts are. It's almost impossible to try to think you can be able to solder them back on yourself. So you might as well just save yourself the aggravation and get a new console if you do that. Okay, that's better. Get most of this off now. I hope that this camera is going to show how clear and shiny it looks compared to how it did look, but it might not. But you'll just have to take my word on it that it can have a perfect clear shine on it. Okay, that's not too bad. Now I'm going to take a couple of dry Q-tips and kind of get some of this extra stuff off as best I can, this extra liquid cleaner. That way I don't have to wait too awfully long before I can start reapplying the thermal compound. Alright. Now one thing I failed to mention is it's good to have maybe an old business card, but not a paper business card, something that's more on the plastic edge of things. Let me make sure I've got one here. I may have to use a paper one myself. Well, we can use this one, it'll be alright. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we've got our thermal compound, and we're going to apply a thin coat. You may think that the more you put on there, the better, and it looks like that's what Microsoft thought by all this extra crap around here. But honestly, the less you put, the better, because this is just to make sure that all the heat is transferred directly to the heat sinks. And the more you take on there, the less heat is going to be transferred to them, and the more heat will be staying in the computer chips, which is defeating the purpose of this exercise. So, if you just take a little dot, about like that, even that was too much. In fact, I may spread that out on these other ones. Alright, and then take your little card and kind of smooth it out, smooth it around. Kind of do like this so it'll start to spread out. You want to make sure it's got a good coverage over the whole thing. You don't really want to be able to see the chip anymore once you're done. But if it's real globby and coming up pretty high off of it, then you've definitely put too much. Okay, a little bit more spreading. That's definitely a part I'm not as good at. I've seen some people that can do about 3 seconds and have this perfect on there. Alright, that's not too bad. That's a little bit thick for what I usually like, but if I try to take too much more off of there, it might end up meaning I'll have to add more again, so we won't worry about that. Alright, well, it's like this tube is mostly just air, it seems like. Look at that. I'm squeezing the whole thing right now, and it's just sitting there. Wow. There we go. I just paid for mostly air, apparently. Alright. Now, when you get started on this one, go ahead and take a little bit and put it on that smaller part of the GPU. That way you don't forget about it and you'll have enough. Just nice, thin coats here. Doing a back and forth motion will make sure it spreads across the whole width of it, instead of just spreading out right wherever you put the little dot. And also make sure that you didn't accidentally get any of this old compound mixed in, because that'll create a big void and again will force more of the heat to stay on the computer chip. But that doesn't look too bad right there, and that's what we'll go with. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get ready to let me clean off my card here because I actually need this card. What we'll do next is we'll get the heat-seeking compound or the heat sinks, sorry, and get those back on there, and I'll show you how to get the X-clamps back on. Okay, so always want to make sure this is correct. There's two different type of heat sinks. So if you have the other type, the type that's white and a little bit bigger and bulkier, it doesn't actually really matter which way you end up putting it. But for this one, as you can see, this extra bar here, that needs to go right here. If you notice, there's a little opening in between these capacitors, and that's where that goes, is it kind of sticks in between there like so. Now I only do one at a time. In fact, I'm going to do the GPU first because it's easier and it's shorter. Same thing with this. It's just if you've got the newer age version, or whatever has that little pipe that kind of comes out and has a little piece that comes up here. You just make sure that that part is in front and not like flipped around the back or anything. Okay, so we got that on there. We're going to flip it around and get one of our X clamps. Now this is a lot easier than taking them off. Just make sure you get the actual clamp part of it into the little slot on those heatsink bolts, and then start popping them back on there as best you can. Sometimes if you did bend it a little bit, you will actually have to take your screwdriver and try to pry it back on there. But just make sure it's popped on there good, and make sure once you've got everything on there that the heatsink doesn't move around too freely. I think it could have a little tiny bit of give. Like, see, you can kind of hear it. Oh, let me keep this still so you can kind of hear. So you can tell it has a little bit of give, and that's okay because those little black bolts that we took out at the beginning are what seal the deal and hold it all together. Alright, now we're going to put the CPU chip back, heatsink back on. And let's get our other X clamp, same story here. Just make sure everything is good and pushed down. Just because it makes a clipping noise like you just heard doesn't mean it's down. But in fact, I thought this one was down, but it's not. And sometimes what will happen is you'll get ready to put this one down and the opposite one will pop back up. So just be really careful that you've got all these down. These are very important. This is what creates a good seal around the whole chip and a balanced seal as well. There we go, there's that. And there's that one. Alright, everything's good. Now, these little bolts should be about flush with the X clamp. So if it's higher or lower, it shouldn't be higher. But if it's lower, then you definitely need to do some more pushing to get that all the way on there. Alright, now we're going to put it back in our case. Our metal housing here. Just going to slide it back in. And then we're going to get these 8 bolts. Now, I do this because I have a big background in percussion and drumming, and with drum heads, you always cross thread everything. You don't just go around and around. That makes sure that everything is evenly tightened and that there's no weird places on the drum head. And I feel that it's the same concept